but he refused the reward and changed 3 lives forever. David woke up early that morning to the soft sound of birds chirping outside his small window. The sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow across his modest room. He yawned, stretched his arms, and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Today, like every other day, he had a long list of deliveries ahead of him. But for David, this wasn't just a job. It was a way to keep himself busy and help others, even in small ways. He never cared much for money or recognition. His happiness came from seeing smiles, from knowing he made someone's day a little easier. After a quick breakfast of toast and tea, David packed his delivery bag, making sure everything was in order. As he stepped outside, he greeted his neighbors with a polite nod and a warm smile. Everyone in the neighborhood knew David, not as a hero, but as a kind, dependable young man who was always ready to lend a hand. He had that rare ability to notice when someone needed help, even if they didn't ask for it. The streets were already buzzing with the morning crowd. Children hurried to school, shopkeepers opened their stores, and the city began its daily rhythm. David walked briskly, delivering groceries and packages, carefully navigating through the crowd. He enjoyed observing life around him, the laughter of children playing in the park, the gentle chatter of people greeting each other, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery. To him, these small moments were reminders of life's simple joys. It was late morning when David's path led him past the small, cozy cafe at the corner of Maple Street. He always liked this part of town. The cafe had a charming sign that swayed slightly in the wind, and the aroma of fresh coffee spilled into the street. Today, though, the peaceful morning suddenly changed. David noticed a commotion outside the cafe. People were gathered in a small crowd, pointing and talking loudly. Curiosity made him quicken his pace, and he soon saw what had happened.
An elderly woman had fallen to the ground, clutching her arm in pain. Her handbag lay a few feet away, and a young man, clearly in a hurry, grabbed it and ran.
Without thinking twice, David sprang into action. He had always believed that hesitation could cost someone more than it could save, and today was no exception. He chased after the thief, weaving through the crowd with surprising speed and determination. The thief looked back once, surprised by David's sudden pursuit, but David didn't slow down. He could feel his heart racing, adrenaline pumping through his veins. A few blocks later, David caught up. The thief stumbled on the uneven sidewalk, and David grabbed the bag, holding it firmly. The thief, realizing he had no chance, tried to snatch it back, but David held on tightly. "It's over. Leave it," David said calmly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The thief muttered something under his breath and ran off, disappearing into the busy streets. David turned around, clutching the bag, and saw the elderly woman struggling to stand. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Her eyes were wide with surprise and relief. "Yes, Thank you so much," she stammered. David handed her the bag. "I'm glad you're safe," he said, helping her steady herself. She smiled, a warm, grateful smile that seemed to light up the space between them. People began to gather around, praising David's bravery. The cafe owner, a cheerful man named Mr. Reynolds, hurried outside. "Young man, that was incredible! You risked yourself to protect her," he exclaimed. "Please, let me give you a reward for what you've done." David shook his head, smiling softly. "No, sir."
"I didn't do it for a reward. I just did what I felt was right."
His voice was calm, sincere, and there was no trace of arrogance. Mr.
Reynolds looked surprised, but respected his answer. "You're a rare person, David."
Rare indeed, he said quietly, as if acknowledging something deeper than the surface act. As the crowd slowly dispersed, David helped the elderly woman inside the cafe, making sure she was comfortable and had water to drink. She insisted on calling her daughter to tell her about the incident, her voice shaking with emotion as she recounted what had happened. David stayed a moment longer, making sure she was settled before stepping back outside. The streets had returned to their usual rhythm, but something had shifted in David's mind. He didn't think about the attention he had received or the praise from the crowd. All he felt was a quiet sense of fulfillment, a deep inner peace that came from knowing he had helped someone in need. For him, that was reward enough. As he continued his deliveries for the day, people waved and nodded at him, some whispering about the brave young man who had stopped a thief in broad daylight. David smiled politely, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. He didn't crave recognition. In fact, he preferred life to be simple and straightforward. Helping others was enough, and he knew that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the most profound impact. By late afternoon, David had completed most of his deliveries. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. He paused for a moment to catch his breath, leaning against a fence and watching children play in a nearby park. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair, and he thought about the day's events. It had started like any other ordinary day, but it had turned into something extraordinary. Not because of him, but because of the simple choice to do what was right without expecting anything in return. That evening, as David returned home, he reflected quietly on the events of the day, where he felt no pride, no desire for fame, no need for acknowledgement. He only felt gratitude for the chance to make a difference, no matter how small. He knew, deep in his heart, that every kind act had the potential to ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could never fully understand. And so, David went to bed that night with a calm mind and a warm heart. Outside, the city settled into the quiet of night, and stars began to appear one by one in the sky. David didn't know it yet, but his simple act of courage that day would set in motion a chain of events that would change 3 lives forever, starting quietly, with a small decision, and leaving a lasting mark on the hearts of those who witnessed it. The day after the incident, Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman whom David had helped, woke up with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, gratitude, and a quiet warmth spread through her chest. She sat by her window sipping her morning tea, staring at the sunlight dancing on the garden outside. It was as if the world had suddenly become a little brighter, and she felt a deep sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. Losing her husband had left a hollow ache in her life. Most days she went through the motions, visiting friends occasionally, but mostly sitting alone in her small, tidy apartment. The act of kindness from a stranger, a complete stranger, stirred something inside her, a reminder that goodness still existed in the world. She replayed the moment in her mind. David chasing the thief, returning her purse without hesitation, and refusing the reward. His calm determination, his quiet confidence, and his gentle words left a mark on her heart. "I just did what I felt was right," he had said. Those words echoed in her mind. Rasp.
They were simple yet powerful. Mrs.
Butts. Thompson realized that she wanted to carry that same spirit into her own life. By mid-morning, she decided to take a small walk to clear her mind. The streets were alive with activity. Shopkeepers arranging their displays, children laughing as they ran past, neighbors exchanging friendly greetings. Thompson paused at the corner park, watching a group of young children play. She noticed their joy and energy, so different from the quiet life she had been leading. And then it hit her. Maybe she could do something more than just exist quietly. Maybe she could give her time, her energy, and her experience to those who needed it. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson called the local community center, a place she had known but never visited. She spoke to the coordinator, explaining that she wanted to volunteer. She didn't know exactly how she could help, but she knew she wanted to make a difference. The coordinator, a cheerful woman named Clara, welcomed her immediately, arranging for her to assist with a program for children and senior citizens. Mrs. Thompson felt a surge of excitement, a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Meanwhile, the story of David's courage and honesty had begun to spread. The small cafe owner had shared the tale with friends, and soon it reached the local newspaper. A young journalist named Emma read the article with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Emma had been a reporter for a few years, but had grown weary of stories filled with conflict, scandal, and negativity. Life often felt harsh, and people seemed more interested in personal gain than in helping one another. Reading about David's selfless act was like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that there were still people who believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. Emma decided she wanted to meet David.
She imagined a story that went beyond the act itself, a story about character, integrity, and quiet heroism.
She called the cafe, arranging a meeting, and on the day they were supposed to meet, she found herself standing outside, waiting for the young man whose name had already become a symbol of hope in the small town. When David arrived, he greeted her politely but with the same quiet demeanor he always had. He wasn't boastful, nor did he seem eager for attention. Emma noticed how naturally he interacted with people on the street, waving at neighbors, helping a man pick up dropped newspapers, and smiling at a child who had tripped while running. Emma's pen felt almost useless compared to the life she was witnessing unfold before her. "David," Emma began, "your act yesterday, it inspired a lot of people. Can you tell me why you did it?" David looked thoughtful for a moment. "I didn't do it to inspire anyone," he said softly. "I just saw someone in trouble." I couldn't ignore it. I think we all have chances like that in life, to do what's right, to help when we can. "That's enough for me." Emma listened intently, captivated not just by his words, but by his presence. There was honesty in his voice, humility in his actions, and an undeniable kindness that seemed to radiate outward. As they spoke, Emma realized something important. Her stories could focus on more than conflict. They could show people the best of humanity, the way a single act of courage could spark hope. She left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose and a plan to highlight unsung heroes in her city, people like David who acted with integrity and compassion without expecting anything in return. Back at the community center, Mrs. Sora Thompson threw herself into volunteering. She helped organize activities for children, listened to stories from senior citizens, and shared her own experiences with anyone who would listen. Each small interaction brought a smile to someone's face, and in return, her own heart felt lighter. She began to form bonds she hadn't thought possible, discovering the joy of human connection and the beauty of being needed.
It didn't take long for Mrs. Mina Man
Thompson to notice changes within herself.
She felt energized in the mornings, eager to meet the day with purpose.
The loneliness that had weighed on her for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of belonging. The ripple effect of David's simple act, the choice to refuse a reward and do what was right, had extended to her life in ways she could never have imagined. Meanwhile, Emma's articles began to reach a wider audience. Readers wrote letters and emails, sharing their own stories of small acts of kindness. The city, which often felt indifferent and cold, started to show glimpses of warmth and connection. People began helping each other more, inspired by the examples Emma shared.
And through it all, David remained unaware of the growing impact of his actions. He continued his daily routine, humble and grounded, believing that the right thing to do was always worth doing, even if no one noticed.
One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson and Emma happened to cross paths at the community center, but they exchanged stories, realizing that their lives had both been influenced by the same act of kindness. Mrs. Purpose Thompson spoke about the renewed sense of purpose she had found, while Emma shared how David's story had transformed her perspective on her work and life. They laughed, cried, and marveled at the way one person's courage could inspire multiple lives. By the end of the week, Mrs. Thompson felt a profound change in herself. She had learned that even in the quietest moments, life could be full of meaning. The world, she realized, was filled with opportunities to make a difference, and sometimes it only took one person to show the way. She thought about David often, grateful that his small act had set her on this path. Emma, too, felt transformed. She had regained her faith in humanity, her passion for storytelling reignited. She knew that her work could influence people in positive ways, just as David had influenced her. She began to plan a series of features that would celebrate the quiet heroes of her city, hoping to inspire others to act with integrity and compassion. As the week came to a close, Mrs. Thompson, Emma, and even the people who read Emma's articles began to experience the subtle but powerful truth of David's actions. One small decision to do the right thing, without expecting reward, could spark a chain of events that changed lives in ways no one could fully predict. But though David himself continued his quiet, humble life, he unknowingly became the catalyst for a wave of hope and kindness. He had no idea that his simple choice, the decision to refuse the reward and act purely out of conscience, had touched the hearts of people who were struggling, disillusioned, or in need of inspiration. His courage had become the seed from which compassion and purpose would grow in ways he could never have imagined. It was a gentle reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary changes start with ordinary people doing what is right. And for Mrs. Thompson and Emma, the impact of that single act would continue to unfold, guiding them toward lives filled with meaning, connection, and hope. Emma couldn't stop thinking about David, his words, his quiet humility, and the simple act of helping someone without expecting anything in return had left a deep impression on her. She had spent years covering stories that focused on conflict, struggles, and scandals, and over time, she had started to lose faith in people. But David had reminded her that there were still those who acted purely out of kindness, without thought of recognition or reward. His story was more than news. It was a lesson in integrity, in hope, and in the power of one person to make a difference.
Over the next few days, Emma threw herself into her work with renewed passion. She began to write a series of articles focused on unsung heroes in her city, ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly without seeking fame.
Each story was carefully crafted, highlighting the courage, kindness, and resilience of individuals who often went unnoticed.
And as she wrote, Emma felt something shift within herself.
She realized that her own life had become more meaningful because she could share these stories, inspiring others to act with compassion. One afternoon, while reviewing emails from readers, Emma noticed a message that caught her attention. It was from a single mother named Rosa. She wrote about how reading the article on David had changed her perspective and given her hope when she was feeling completely lost. Rosa was struggling to support her 2 young children after losing her job at a small factory. Bills were piling up, rent was overdue, and she felt exhausted and defeated.
Emma was touched by Rosa's words. She decided to reach out, wanting to connect her with someone who could help.
Emma arranged for Rosa to meet David. She knew that he would never ask for recognition or publicity, but she hoped that even a small gesture of guidance or support from him could make a real difference in Rosa's life. When Rosa first saw David, she was immediately struck by his calm presence. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like someone who simply understood people, someone whose actions spoke louder than words. There was a warmth in his eyes that put her at ease, and she felt safe enough to share her struggles openly. David listened carefully, asking questions to understand her situation without judgment. He learned that Rosa had recently lost her job due to factory downsizing, leaving her with no income and limited options. Her children were young and full of energy, and she was doing her best to care for them while also managing the stress of her financial situation. She admitted to feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, and at times hopeless. David didn't have a grand plan or a large sum of money to offer, but what he did have was knowledge, patience, and a willingness to help in practical ways. He began by helping Rosa update her resume and teaching her basic job-seeking skills. He introduced her to a few small business owners he knew, people who might be looking for reliable workers. He also spent time with her children, reading stories and helping them with small tasks, giving Rosa a chance to focus on preparing for interviews and meetings. At first, Rosa was hesitant to accept help. She had always been independent, proud of her ability to manage her family on her own. Accepting assistance felt strange, almost humiliating. But David's approach was different. He didn't make her feel weak or incapable, but instead, he treated her with dignity, showing her that seeking help didn't mean she was failing. It meant she was strong enough to reach for a better future. Over the weeks, small changes began to appear. Rosa found a temporary job at a local store which gave her some stability and hope. She began to manage her household more effectively, knowing that support was available if she needed it. Her children began to smile more, laugh more, and feel secure in their mother's newfound optimism. And Rosa, for the first time in months, felt the weight of despair lifting. She realized that one act of courage, from someone she had never met, could start a chain reaction that transformed her life. Meanwhile, Emma continued to write, documenting the journey. She followed Rosa's progress, sharing her story with readers who were inspired by the tangible impact of David's actions. People began to comment on the articles, sharing their own experiences and expressing a desire to help others in their communities. Emma's work began to take on a life of its own, connecting people who had never met but were united by the desire to make the world better. Back in his quiet life, David remained unaware of the growing impact he was having. He continued his deliveries, greeted neighbors warmly, and helped where he could, simply because it felt right. He never considered the attention or recognition his actions might generate. For him, the reward was in seeing someone smile, in knowing that he had done the right thing. One evening, Rosa called David to thank him. Her voice was filled with emotion as she spoke. "I don't know how to explain this," she said, "but your help changed everything for me. My children are happy again. I feel like I can breathe, like I can finally move forward." David listened quietly, a soft smile forming on his face. "I'm glad," he said simply. "You did all the hard work, Burrs. I just helped a little. The rest was yours." Rosa's gratitude reminded David of something he had always believed. True change doesn't come from grand gestures or rewards. It comes from consistent, small actions that show care, honesty, and compassion. By refusing the reward in the first place, he had set in motion a chain of events that extended far beyond what he could see. Each life he touched had the potential to touch many more, creating ripples that spread quietly but powerfully. Emma reflected on this truth in her writing. She realized that her stories were not just about highlighting heroes. They were about showing readers that anyone could create change. A kind word, a moment of patience, a small act of courage could spark a transformation that no one could predict. David's story was living proof of that principle. Over time, Rosa's life continued to improve. She secured a stable job, gained confidence, and strengthened the bond with her children. She began volunteering at her local community center, inspired by Mrs. Thompson and by the example David had unknowingly set. She wanted to give back, to ensure that kindness continued to flow outward, touching others in ways that mirrored her own journey. Emma, too, experienced personal growth. She started mentoring young journalists, teaching them not just about reporting facts, but about the power of storytelling to inspire and uplift. Her career took on new meaning, grounded in the idea that stories could change hearts, ignite hope, and encourage action. And so, the ripple effect of David's single choice to act courageously and refuse a reward continued to expand. What began as a simple decision on a quiet morning had reached far beyond the streets of his small town. Lives were being transformed, people were finding hope, and a sense of connection began to weave its way through the community. First, even though David himself remained humble and unaware of the full impact of his actions, the world around him was slowly changing. People were learning that doing the right thing, even in small ways, mattered more than recognition, money, or praise. David had shown them that true heroism was not loud or flashy. It was quiet, steadfast, and deeply human. The story of his bravery, his humility, and his refusal of a reward was no longer just a tale for a newspaper article. It had become a living, breathing example of how one individual's choice could touch many lives. Mrs. Belligwest, pardon my head. Thompson had found purpose and companionship. Emma had rekindled her passion for journalism, and Rosa had found stability and hope, each of their lives intertwined in subtle, meaningful ways, all tracing back to the quiet courage of one man who simply chose to do what was right. As David continued his deliveries the next morning, unaware of the lives he had already touched so profoundly, the city moved around him with its usual rhythm. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. People were kinder, more aware, and more willing to help. And though the change was quiet, it was powerful. A testament to the enduring truth that one person's actions could spark hope, transform lives, and inspire a chain reaction that would never fully be known. Rosa's life had begun to change in ways she never imagined possible. Her small apartment, once filled with tension and worry, now echoed with laughter and the sound of her children playing. She had started working at the local store, earning enough to pay bills and put food on the table. But more importantly, she had found hope again, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. Breathlessly, she woke up with a sense of purpose, ready to face challenges with determination. And all of this had started because a quiet, kind man named David had chosen to act without expecting anything in return. David has always remained unaware of the depth of the impact he had created.
He continued his daily routine, delivering groceries, greeting neighbors, helping wherever he could.
To him, these were ordinary actions, part of the rhythm of life. He didn't seek recognition, nor did he imagine that his small choices could influence the lives of people he had never even met. But quietly, his actions were creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond his understanding. One afternoon, Rosa invited David to her home, not for any grand gesture, but simply to show her appreciation. She wanted him to meet her children, to see the small victories that had become part of their everyday lives. When David arrived, he was greeted by shy smiles and curious eyes. Her children, initially hesitant, soon warmed up to him, drawn to his calm presence and gentle demeanor. Rosa watched as David engaged with them, reading stories, playing small games, and encouraging their creativity. She realized that his kindness extended not only to adults but also to children, teaching them by example the importance of compassion and honesty.
Over tea, Rosa spoke about her journey. David, she began, I don't even know where to start.
You may not realize it, but you've changed our lives. I was on the edge, unsure of what to do next, and your help made everything possible. Great. I can smile again, my children can be happy, and I feel like I have control over my life. You've given me hope. David listened quietly, a modest smile forming on his face. I didn't do much, he said softly. You worked hard. I only helped guide the way a little. The rest came from you. Rosa shook her head. No, David.
It wasn't just guidance. I am.
It was your choice to help without asking for anything in return. That's what matters. It gave me courage when I had none. It reminded me that there are people who care, and that's more valuable than anything else. David's humility remained intact. but deep inside he felt a quiet warmth. He hadn't acted for recognition or praise, but seeing the transformation in Rosa and her children, he understood the real impact of a single, selfless choice. His small act of courage, refusing the reward, had touched not only the woman he helped that day in front of the cafe, but had now extended to another family, giving them the tools to rebuild their lives. Meanwhile, Emma continued to follow these developments closely. She had written about David's initial act, then about Rose's journey, and now she was preparing a follow-up story about the ongoing ripple effects of simple acts of kindness.
Her readers were captivated.
Many shared their own experiences, stories of quiet heroism, and the ways small gestures had changed their lives. Emma began to notice a trend. When people were inspired by kindness, they often became agents of kindness themselves, creating a chain of positive actions that spread far and wide. At the same time, Mrs. Narration Thompson's life continued to blossom in new directions. She had found purpose in volunteering, forming friendships with children and senior citizens alike. The community center became a second home to her, and every interaction reminded her of the profound difference one person could make. Mrs. Dawes, under now desp, Thompson often spoke about David, marveling at how his simple decision had motivated her to live more fully, to give more generously, and to embrace life with renewed energy. The city itself began to feel subtly different. People were kinder to one another, inspired by the stories Emma published. Strangers helped each other with small acts, holding doors, offering assistance, listening with empathy. The communities came together in ways they hadn't before, realizing that the world could feel warmer if everyone chose to contribute in even the smallest ways. All of this stemmed unknowingly from David's quiet courage. One afternoon, David received a call from Emma. She asked if he would accompany her to a local community meeting, where Rosa and Mrs. Thompson would also be present.
David agreed, curious but unassuming, unaware of the significance.
When he arrived, he saw the three women, Emma, Rosa, and Mrs. Thompson, gathered together, each radiating warmth, gratitude, and hope. Rose approached him first, her children trailing behind. "David," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "we wanted you to see this. Look at what your actions have inspired. We're all helping others now, passing along the kindness you showed us. We want you to know that even though you didn't seek recognition, you've created something beautiful." Mrs. Thompson smiled, holding a small notebook filled with notes about the children she helped at the community center.
Your decision to act courageously sparked a journey for all of us.
You may not realize it, but you've become a guide for others, showing us what it means to be selfless and kind. Emma, too, expressed her gratitude. "David, I've written many stories in my life, but none as powerful as this one. It has inspired me, and I know it has inspired thousands of readers." Your choice to refuse a reward has reminded people that integrity and compassion matter more than anything else. David listened quietly, humbled by their words. He didn't seek praise, but he understood something profound. His simple act, performed without expectation, had created a chain reaction. 3 lives had been touched directly and countless others indirectly. He realized that true heroism was not about recognition, it was about the quiet courage to do what was right, no matter the cost or reward. The meeting continued with stories shared by others who had been inspired by Emma's articles. People spoke of small acts they had performed after reading about David, acts that had brightened someone's day, offered help, or encouraged hope. The room was filled with a sense of community, a recognition that kindness was contagious, and that one decision could ripple outward in unexpected and meaningful ways. That evening, as David walked home, he reflected on the events of the day. He thought about Rosa, now confident and thriving, about Mrs. Thompson living fully and purposefully, and about Emma, whose work was igniting inspiration throughout the city. Each person had been touched by a small, selfless act, a moment of courage in a world that often felt harsh and indifferent. And through it all, David realized that his actions had created a legacy of hope, kindness, and transformation. Back in his quiet apartment, David sat by the window, watching the city settle into night. Lights twinkled in homes, laughter echoed faintly from distant streets, and somewhere people were helping one another, inspired by stories he had never even known existed. He felt no pride, only a deep, quiet satisfaction.
He had acted because it was right, and now, unknowingly, he had changed lives forever.
The story of David's courage, humility, and refusal of a reward was no longer just an event from a morning at the corner cafe. It had become a living example of how one person's quiet decision could spark hope, inspire others, and create a chain reaction of positive change. The impact reached far beyond what David could see or understand, touching lives in ways that would continue to unfold for years to come. And while David himself remained humble and unaware of the full scope of the ripple effect he had created, the lives around him told a story of transformation, inspiration, and the enduring power of kindness.
Rosa, Mrs.
Thompson and Emma were all walking examples of how a single, selfless choice could change not only individual lives, but the very spirit of a community. In the end, the city had begun to feel just a little warmer, a little more connected, and a little more alive. And all of it had started with one man's quiet decision to act courageously, refusing the reward that had been offered, and choosing instead to do what was right. David woke up to another ordinary morning, the sun gently spilling through the window of his small apartment. He went about his routine without expectation, having breakfast, checking his delivery list, and preparing for another day of work. To any passerby, he seemed like an ordinary man, quietly moving through life. But what he didn't know was that the impact of his actions had grown far beyond anything he could imagine. Lives had changed because of his courage, his honesty, and the simple choice he had made to refuse a reward when he helped Mrs. Thompson that day at the cafe. As David walked through the streets delivering packages, he noticed something different. People were kinder, more considerate. A man helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries. Children played together without squabbling, encouraged by adults who smiled and cheered them on. Rosa, Mrs. Thompson, and even Emma's efforts had begun to influence the small community in subtle ways, creating a ripple effect that extended further than David could ever see. He smiled quietly to himself, thinking nothing of it, unaware that he had become the heart of this quiet transformation. Later that afternoon, he received an unexpected call from Emma. She had arranged a small gathering to bring together some of the people who had been directly and indirectly touched by his actions.
David hesitated for a moment, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but agreed.
When he arrived, he was greeted with warm smiles and genuine gratitude. Rosa ran up first, her children following close behind, their laughter filling the room.
David, you need to see this, Rosa said, holding his hand firmly. Look at what your actions started.
You changed my life, and now I can help others. My children are happy, and I finally feel hope again. Inspiration. None of this would have been possible without you.
Thompson stepped forward next, her eyes shining with warmth.
You may not realize it, but your courage inspired me to live fully again.
I've met people, volunteered, and found joy that I thought was lost forever. All because you chose to do the right thing. Emma, ever the observer, held a notebook filled with letters, emails, and stories from readers inspired by David's selfless act.
David, you have created a movement of kindness, she said softly.
Through your example, people are acting with integrity and compassion. You didn't ask for recognition, but what you've done has reached countless lives. Breaths. David felt a quiet emotion stirring inside him, a mix of humility and gratitude. He hadn't sought any of this attention, yet seeing the faces of those whose lives had been touched, he understood the depth of a single choice. His decision to act courageously without expecting a reward had sparked a chain reaction, transforming the lives of people he had never imagined and inspiring them to continue the cycle of kindness. The room was filled with stories. Rosa shared how she had secured a stable job, gained confidence, and found the strength to volunteer at a local community center. She spoke of her children laughing again, of neighbors helping her in small ways, and of the sense of belonging she had begun to feel. Mrs. Thompson described the friendships she had built, the lives she had touched through volunteering, and the joy she now found in her daily routines. Emma shared how her articles had inspired readers to act with compassion, leading to a wave of small, meaningful actions across the city. David listened, deeply moved but modest. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said softly. "I just acted in the moment. You all are the ones creating change." But those gathered knew better. They saw the spark that had started it all, the courage, integrity, and kindness of a man who acted without expectation. After the gathering, Rosa took a quiet moment to speak with David alone.
Braven, you may think you didn't do much, but David, you gave me more than help. You gave me belief. Belief that people are good, that life can be better, that hope is always possible.
"You've given me a second chance at life." David smiled, the words touching him deeply. "I'm glad I could help. But remember, it's your courage and determination that made the difference. I only showed you a path. You walked it." As he left Rosa's home, David realized that what had started as a single quiet act had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. One decision, to act bravely and refuse a reward, had become a catalyst for hope, inspiration, and positive change. It had touched 3 lives directly, but through them, countless others had been affected, creating a ripple that spread across the city. Walking home, David reflected on the idea of choice. Every day, people were presented with opportunities to act with kindness, courage, and integrity. Most passed by without notice, but even one small action could create profound effects. He thought about the people he had helped, the joy and hope now present in their lives, and the stories that Emma had shared. The realization filled him with quiet satisfaction. True heroism, he understood, wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about the willingness to do what was right, no matter the cost, and to act with selflessness and integrity. At home, David sat by the window and looked out at the city bathed in the soft glow of evening lights. Children played in the streets, neighbors spoke kindly to one another, and somewhere people were helping in ways they hadn't before. He knew, without knowing all the details, that his actions had set off a chain of events that were still unfolding. Lives were being changed, hearts were being touched, and hope was spreading quietly but powerfully. David thought about Mrs. Thompson, living fully and purposefully. He thought of Emma, using her voice to inspire thousands. He thought of Rosa, now thriving and confident, passing on the kindness she had received. And he realized that this was the true reward, not money, recognition, or fame, but the knowledge that one small, selfless choice could change the course of lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and the story of David's quiet courage continued to spread. The ripple effect of his actions reached further than he could ever know. Inspired by Emma's articles, more people began to act with kindness in their own communities. Acts that might have seemed small, a helping hand, a comforting word, a moment of patience, began to build, creating a network of compassion that strengthened the city. And yet David remained the same humble man, unaware of how central he had become to this movement of goodness. To him, life continued simply, deliveries, greetings, helping where he could. But behind the scenes, lives were changing, hearts were healing, and hope was flourishing, all because he had chosen to act courageously and without expectation. One quiet evening, David returned to the corner cafe where it all began. The cafe smelled of fresh coffee, and the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. He paused, thinking about the elderly woman he had helped, about the path his life had taken since that morning, and about the lives he had unknowingly influenced. A gentle smile formed on his face. Life, he realized, was a collection of small choices, each with the potential to shape the future in ways no one could predict. He walked home slowly, thinking about the countless acts of kindness he had witnessed over the past weeks, the smiles, the gestures, the words of encouragement. They reminded him that life was full of opportunities to make a difference.
And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to act without thinking of reward, one person willing to do the right thing, no matter the circumstances. That night, David went to bed with a sense of peace. He had not sought recognition, nor had he expected his actions to reach far beyond his small corner of the world.
And yet, through his courage, humility, and selflessness, he had become a quiet hero, touching lives in ways he might never fully understand.
He had proven that even ordinary people, living ordinary lives, could create extraordinary change.
And so, the story of David, the man who refused the reward and changed 3 lives forever, became more than just a tale of bravery. It became a living example of hope, kindness, and the profound impact one individual can have. It showed that courage and integrity, when acted upon, can ripple outward endlessly, touching lives and inspiring others to continue the chain of goodness.
Through David's actions, Mrs.
Thompson had found purpose, Emma had discovered inspiration, and Rosa had regained hope. And through them, countless others had been influenced, creating a legacy of compassion, courage, and quiet heroism that would continue to unfold long into the future. The world, David realized, though he would never have said it aloud, was brighter because of small, selfless acts. And the lesson was clear. Sometimes refusing a reward, choosing to act with integrity, and helping others simply because it is right, can change not just one life, but the lives of many forever.